Welcome back to Petty Astrology. I'm your host, Kaycee Felton-Lui, and we are back with season 3, if you can believe it. I actually had recorded an entirely different intro for this episode, and it got deleted, and I have no idea how. No idea. So we're just going with it. I don't even remember what I said. I just know that I really liked it. So we're going to practice letting it go, because it's just been that kind of a week. And I don't know about you, I do not have the energy to get all worked up about this. I really don't. Am I disappointed that it happened? Absolutely. Absolutely. I had prepared a whole little thing, and for what? For it to be deleted and disappear. But life is like that sometimes, and Gemini season reminds us that we really have to laugh, even when it feels like there's absolutely nothing funny. That's usually when I do my best work. If it doesn't get deleted, that is. But we can plan all we want. We can tell the universe that it's going to be this particular way, whether we like it or not, and that's not always how things work out. Sometimes we have to improvise. And that is another great lesson of Gemini energy. Feel the vibes out, and then go from there. Be open, curious. Maybe this intro is better than the last intro, whatever it was. I do think I talked about this, though. I do think I talked a little bit about finding the humor in it all, because things have felt so deeply heavy. And I think something that is important to remember is that we're not supposed to go through these heavy moments, these collective experiences that we're having in isolation. Because all of the air signs, in their own different ways, are very connected to communication and interconnectivity and human relationship. And communication, verbal, nonverbal, creative, uncreative, all of it functions to keep us connected and productive with other human beings. And humor is such a big part of that. Because if everything is so serious all the time, it really gives us no room to move the energy up. Because when we're joking, when we're laughing, even in moments where it feels like we shouldn't be laughing, we're changing the energy. We're doing energy work. And that wasn't something that I realized until the past few years. I've always known myself to be a very silly person. I have a Gemini Mars. I do tend to do things with a sense of humor, if you hadn't noticed. But it's a survival mechanism for me. It has always been a survival mechanism for me because I've had a lot of very serious things happen in life, like a lot of us have. And for me, doing the spiritual thing, learning more about this stuff, it became very clear to me that was one of the main ways that I've actually cared for myself over the years, by letting myself laugh, letting myself shift uncomfortable energy into something that I find more enjoyable, something that helps me process. And I've come across people in this world that humor doesn't necessarily always function that same way for them, and that's okay. People don't have to agree with everything that I find funny. I already know I'm hilarious, but it's okay if you don't think so. You can stay. I will try not to tease you too much. But being funny, making jokes, making observations, finding humor in something requires observing it. It requires some level of intelligence, some level of observation, right? And so when times are very serious and sometimes very dire, we can forget to reach for that tool that humor can be for us. Not to bypass anything, but to process it, to move through it, to make something out of it that helps you move forward. Gemini energy doesn't like to stay in the same place. And humor can be a little bit of gas in our gas tanks. It can help get us to our next destination. It's very easy to be exhausted by the circumstances that we're surrounded by the lives that we're living in the time that we're living in, where things are changing very much and very rapidly. It's very easy to feel like we're not doing enough, or we're not ready, or we just can't make the jump. Because we're all being asked to move with this energy, to grow, to develop collectively and individually. That's work, that's effort, that's energy. But we cannot pour from an empty cup. We cannot be serious and morose all the time because circumstances around us may feel that way. We have to be able to find the lightness, find the silliness in it, the playfulness, the experimentation, instead of getting stuck. Because if we're used to things being a certain way, if we're comfortable with them being a certain way, it is very easy to just stay in that one place and to give in to the weight of that. And I think humor is a way to connect us back with our soul, with this deeper, lighter part of ourselves, the part of ourselves that can step back and zoom out and look at the big picture and be like, you know what, this is ridiculously annoying right now. It's so annoying that I'm so mad, but I can zoom out and see that in 5 years, this story is going to be fucking hilarious at a dinner party. Or I'm going to write a stupid song about it. Or I'm going to call my friends and tell them what a jackass this person is and, blow off some steam. Just because the problems that we might be facing are heavy doesn't mean that the solutions have to be. And I think part of what we're learning to do is navigate very heavy circumstances and still keep things light, keep things moving in the way that Gemini energy is so good at doing. I think humor is an overlooked type of magic. To take something that feels very mundane or ordinary or frustrating and transform it into something that brings people joy. I can't think of a lot that's more magical than that. Right now we're heading into the last little bit of Gemini season, which just means the sun is in Gemini. And the sun is in any given sign for about a month. And even after the sun and Venus and Mercury move out of Gemini very shortly, we will still have Jupiter in Gemini for the next year. So as we go through this year together, I really want to encourage all of us to look for more opportunities to explore how we can use humor to empower ourselves, how we can use humor to connect ourselves with other people, to work through the circumstances of our lives, to find more room to breathe. We can learn a lot from finding the humor in things and looking at things in a different way. To me, really good comedy can shift our perspective on something because it forces us to look at a subject in a new light or shines a light on something that maybe people don't necessarily like to talk about. Think about how many funny people, comedians, or just people that you know can get away with saying things that other people can't because they're able to deliver it with humor. Because sometimes people can hear hard truths more easily if it's delivered to them in a lighter package. Things that maybe seem heavy or scary or intimidating, they get a lot less intimidating when we can find ways to laugh at them. Today on the podcast, we're talking about Pluto in Aquarius and what it can mean for queer people. Then I give you a heads up on the forecast for the astrology of the week ahead. It's June, it's Pride Month, and do I think it's a coincidence that Pride Month starts every year during Gemini season? No, I don't think so at all. Because Gemini is known to be a little bit unpredictable, a little bit chaotic at times, and I think that is how straight people tend to view gay people. And, they're not wrong about that. I say this as a lesbian, which is, I guess, something that I don't mention enough because people are still surprised when I say it. So here, it's Pride Month, and I finally have a reason to say it. Something that people tend to be curious about is, can you see if somebody is gay or not in their birth chart? And the answer to that is yes. I don't sit in my meetings with my clients and tell them they're gay. I think that that would be really weird. I think that ultimately it is up to the individual to weigh that for themselves. And if they're struggling with that and they want to come and talk to me about it, like that door is open. I'll have that conversation with them. But I am not going to tell people how to look at a birth chart and identify whether or not somebody might be gay, because that would be really dangerous. Because it's still not safe to be a queer person in our culture and in a lot of cultures. And I see astrological information getting misinterpreted and misused all the time. So I just don't want people pointing fingers at other people and being like, hey, your birth chart says you're gay, and that causing issues for people, because it's not black and white like that. It's not like, you just have the gay asteroid in a certain part of your chart. Some people might treat it like that. And that's just not a safe position to put people in. So that's why I gatekeep that information. Gemini energy can have this changeability, this fluidity to it. And so it's not the same all the time. It can be very experimental, and it can be very fun energy too. And so Pride Month being in Gemini season to me is this invitation to kind of reflect on our sexuality, because, for a lot of us that maybe haven't been exposed to queer culture or been around gay people before, to our knowledge, it can be maybe a starting point for people. And the energy is really conducive to that, to trying things out, to thinking about things in a different way, maybe opening your mind. And in our culture, we are really conditioned to be straight, married, have 2.5 kids. Like, there is a very specific idea of what our life should be like, And so when we're indoctrinated with that kind of belief, and there's, of course, nothing wrong with being straight. I have lots of straight friends. I'm an ally. But it is this invitation to think about deeper and to step outside of our comfort zones. And that is very gay. Anybody who is gay knows that at a certain point, we realized that we weren't like the others. And Gemini energy is very open in that way. It is not benefiting from being the same, being static, just going with what everyone else is doing. That's not going to work for Gemini energy. In June of 2023, we got about 11 days with Pluto in Aquarius before it retrograded back into Capricorn. And Pluto is in Aquarius for the entire Pride season of 2024. And with where we're at right now, this really has me reflecting on what it means to be a queer person, what it means to be gay in our culture. The world is changing very rapidly, and we are being confronted with the rise of fascism. And fascists don't like queer people. And that's not to say that there aren't people that are queer that are fascists, because there are. Fascism tends to take on a lot of accomplices just to achieve its ends. And just because you belong to a marginalized group doesn't mean that you can't help them out. When I was a younger person, the big thing was gay marriage, because gay people did not have the right to get married. And that was really a central focus in mainstream queer media, in mainstream liberal media. It was this big push, like, we need to have this equality within the framework of the law. And of course, like, for things like health insurance and benefits and access to your spouse's hospital room as they lay dying, these are very serious issues. So I don't want to downplay that. But what I do want to say is that queerness has become very de-radicalized in the last several decades. And it didn't just start in my lifetime. It's been an ongoing process, because as being gay, being openly queer has become more socially acceptable, more legally acceptable, there have been gay people that have benefited from assimilating to straight culture, for lack of a better term. You can be a wealthy gay person. You can be employed and openly gay in a lot of places. And it felt like when gay marriage really became a thing, that a lot of that effort was deflated. It kind of felt like this win, and okay, we did it. We're equal now. Yay! And if you are a queer person that is of any marginalized identity, you're probably well aware that that's really not the end of the story. And in fact, there are a lot of queer people that didn't really care about gay marriage. And I read a really wonderful book years ago by an author named Dean Spade. And if you've been following me for any amount of time, I've recommended Dean Spade's work a lot. But this book called Normal Life. Dean Spade is a lawyer and is also a transgender person, and was talking about the limitations of centering our queerness around legal advocacy. So like gay marriage, for example. All of this effort and money and time went into fighting for the right to get married. And it took away resources from more radical organizing that is less centered on achieving the things that straight people have, on fighting for liberation in a deeper sense and not just conformity. Because if we look around at the society that we've built, we can see all of the ways that things like marriage, which a lot of people enjoy, actually limit our sense of liberation and what is possible. Because how many people do you know that are stuck in loveless marriages for financial reasons? And this is because we have bigger social problems than whether or not gay people can get married. We have a fundamentally unjust system. And that has gone unaddressed. And you know who used to be the people that would address things like that? Those radical free queer people. And not too long ago in history, queer people were suffering because there was this silent pandemic happening with the HIV/AIDS crisis. Ronald Reagan wouldn't even say the word for the longest time. Meanwhile, queer people were dying, and they were dying horrible, painful, lonely deaths. And really, they only had each other because the culture was so homophobic and didn't give a fuck that a bunch of gay people were dying from a disease. In fact, some people considered it quite just. And you might think, oh, well, that was in the past and we learned so much from it. Did we? Did we really learn from that? Because as I'm looking around, we are going through a pandemic because COVID never went anywhere. And right now, as I am saying this, transgender people are some of the most heavily impacted by the COVID pandemic. Nobody's talking about that. People won't even acknowledge that this is going on. And so we see repeats of history happening. And there are plenty of gay people that couldn't be bothered. So as I look around and I see, video from pride parades all over the country, I see a float going by, Bank of America, Hulu, all this stuff. It doesn't feel radical to me. It feels like corporations slapping rainbows on stuff so that gay people will buy it, so that we think that they're good. And for plenty of people, that's enough. They're like, you know what? Target loves gay people. They do a gay pride thing every year. Meanwhile, Target engages in all kinds of unsavory activities that impact marginalized communities. And they're not the only one. If you slap the word pride on something, that doesn't automatically make it good for gay people. It doesn't mean we've won. And so as we've seen with Pluto and Aquarius so far, the little tastes of it we've gotten, there are plenty of people that are still rallying around marginalizing gay people and actually putting us further back than we've already gotten. Unfortunately, I don't think that that is going to stop because, of course, where does that energy go? It's not going to just disappear. And looking at the state of queer people today, we have really de-radicalized ourselves in a big way. It is enough for some people to go and wave at that Bank of America float and think that they're free. And a lot of times those people are less marginalized than other queer people are. There are some of us within the community as it stands that don't have the luxury of viewing things that way because the world hasn't made space for us to be truly liberated. So what do gay people win by assimilating into white heterosexual colonial ideas of how to live? Yeah, maybe some of us will get on that white supremacist fascist bus, but what does it mean to be able to get married legally when you can't even afford a roof over your head? Or life-saving, gender-affirming care? Or when you can't even walk down the street without being harassed? Or worse. Fascism seeks assimilation, conformity, sameness, and it also seeks compliance, de-radicalization, falling in line. And that is unfortunately what a lot of queer people have done because they're not as impacted by some of this stuff as others. The illusion of liberation is enough for some people, gay, straight, or otherwise. And for queer people, I really think that this has done us a lot more harm than good. Because as we can see, these strides forward, these things that were celebrated by the White House and, rainbow flags on legal buildings, that hasn't gotten us free. That hasn't gotten us even close to free. Because when enough of us have enough comfort and privilege that you don't need to be radical anymore, you don't need to fight for what's right because you have just enough to get by, then that leaves the rest of us in a pretty dire circumstances. And our culture, capitalism, fascism, it seeks to divide us into some people have more than others, and therefore we should fight each other instead of turning around and fighting the actual problem, which is the root of these issues. Pluto is retrograde in Aquarius right now, so it's moving back towards Capricorn, and it'll move back into Capricorn in September, and it'll be there into November. On November 19th of this year, Pluto will move into Aquarius for the next 2 decades. And as I've been talking about on this podcast, this is a massive energetic shift. A lot is going to change, and we've already been getting tastes of it. So this is not stuff that's going to come out of the blue. This is stuff that we've already been seeing bubbling under the surface and exploding. And the way that we get through Pluto and Aquarius is by cooperating, by working together. And for queer people, I think it is really important that we re-radicalize ourselves for this moment. We go back to our roots because that was working. That was getting shit done. We can see all kinds of examples looking around at the way that our legal system has failed us. It is not providing true liberation. It is not grasping things by the root. And I think it's foolish for gay people to rely on that as our method of getting free at this point when we have so much to show us that is not going to work. And by pouring our limited, precious energy into these things that have been tried over and over and haven't gotten us very far, we are wasting time on what could be collective liberation. A world where gay, straight, black, white, no matter what your background or where you're from or who you are, as long as you're not harming other people, you are safe. Because until that happens, gay people will not be safe. We will not be free. The same banks that are sending floats to pride parades are funding genocides around the world that kill queer people. There is no area on this earth that does not have queer people, because where there are people, there is queerness, no matter what fascists try to make you believe. Queer people have always existed and will always exist. There is no getting rid of us. And until queer people in the West realize that we are connected to people in developing countries that we are exploiting by very nature of where we live, how can queer people truly ever be free? Israel uses their supposed queer friendliness to make it seem like they are not committing genocide against Palestinian people. They're like, we are so queer friendly. People that are gay love coming here and love living here. Therefore, how can we be bad? In fact, the term pinkwashing was invented to describe exactly what Israel does. They basically slap a rainbow flag on their country, and then they say, oh, we're good guys. Just like Target, just like Bank of America, just like all of these other entities that we know are causing massive amounts of harm in the world. So as gay people and as straight people that care about gay people, we need to be a lot more critical about what we accept as liberatory. Just because somebody says that it's helping you or getting you free doesn't mean that it actually is. So with Pluto and Aquarius, queer people and straight people who give a fuck about us have the opportunity to grasp things by the root, to get to the bottom of this and stop pasting over it with these illusions of freedom, these illusions of inclusion and equality. We know that that is just not the case. We know that a massive amount of devastation is caused all around the world by the quote-unquote free democracies that we live in. Now, I would say mainstream queer culture is extremely de-radicalized, and so are a lot of queer people. But there are still radical queer people. You're listening to one right now. And the people that I know in my life that are queer and radical are some of the best, truest, most loving people that I've ever met. These are people that are putting themselves on the line to get free. And they're not just doing it for themselves, they're doing it for all of us. And that's where we need to get back to. Those are the people that we need to be putting at the forefront. And we know, looking at all types of liberation struggles around the world, that when we put the most marginalized people at the center of the issue, everybody benefits. Everybody benefits when the least among us are prioritized, because when the most marginalized people are prioritized, that's when shit gets actually fixed. It's not when lesbians can go to war and kill brown people abroad. That's just not it. So my hope for Pluto and Aquarius is that queer people all over the world will start to see themselves as deeply and intrinsically connected, because we are, and not just to other queer people, but to all people in the world. But when we find common cause and solidarity, that's when we can actually make change and create systems that are centered around the liberation of all people. Asking nicely hasn't worked. So either by choice or by necessity, I think that queer people are going to have to step it up. We're going to have to get back to our roots. Just because they say we're free doesn't mean we are. Make queerness radical again. Let's get into our week ahead. So the day that this comes out, it's Wednesday, June 12th, and it's not a day to pick at people, I would say. That was the first thing that came to mind when I looked at this chart. I was like, will not be dealing with people that want to go at me or vice versa, because I try to avoid getting into it with anyone if I'm trying to be productive with my energy. We have a limited amount of energy and a limited amount of time. And with the moon in Virgo and the aspects that it's making, it's just going to be really easy for people to get irritated and go off. And it's just, I have better things to do. I don't know about you. And just to add to the fun, we also have Mercury squaring Saturn that day. So again, there can be frustration, a sense of restriction with that energy. And I know that nobody likes to be frustrated, right? I don't like to be frustrated. I am the first to complain about stuff like that. And, I'm working on it. But these are moments that really benefit us to step back and reflect on what that frustration might be showing us. Is there something that we need to adjust? Is there an idea that the frustration brings to mind? Because sometimes when we experience roadblocks or things not going the way that we expect them to or want them to, that leads to creativity. That leads to us building new pathways. And people get really stuck in that feeling of frustration, and they're so fixated on, oh, I'm uncomfortable, oh, I don't like this, oh, I'm uncomfortable, that they don't take a moment, take a breath to be present and actually listen to what that frustration is showing them. And we have so much in Gemini right now, including Mercury. So the energy is really right for us to be collecting information from all of our experiences, good, bad, ugly. All of it is stuff we can learn from and move forward with. Now, Thursday afternoon here on the West Coast, we're going to have the moon opposing Saturn. So that can often feel a little restrictive. Maybe we are more conscious of the things that are holding us back, or maybe where we're holding ourselves back. It can be a little moody. It doesn't have to be. It absolutely doesn't have to be. It can also be very constructive energy as well. I think the important thing with this energy is if you are feeling uncomfortable, if you are feeling restrictive, if you're feeling emotional, you don't need to internalize it. It's not a personal flaw to feel some type of way. You can feel uncomfortable, but you don't have to pick yourself apart to attempt to resolve it or rectify it. You can just accept that you feel kind of crappy or you feel kind of uncomfortable. And it passes. And then Friday, we've got the moon moving into Libra. And so that means it'll be trining Pluto. And that tends to mean some collective intensity. And that doesn't mean that it's intense for everyone. Everything that I'm saying now, I'm talking very generally, I'm talking for the collective. If you have any aspects happening in your personal chart, it's going to be a little bit different for you. But in general, this energy, it breeds intensity. And so again, if you are in your feelings, it's okay to pacify yourself, to take a break, to sit with it, to meditate, whatever it is that you need to do to move through that energy and keep your sanity, keep your cool, do the things that you have to do and move forward. Not bypass, but just move forward. You can do that. That's okay. And we're already going to have our minds going a bit because we have Mercury moving very close to that Gemini sun. It's a cazimi. You might hear that word being thrown around. And a cazimi is neither good nor bad. It's just an intensity of energy. And so we could be really in our heads. We could be really wanting to communicate with people. We can be really inspired, having a lot of ideas. It might be a good time to keep a pen and paper handy, keep that notes app handy. And if you're not feeling that way, you might be inspired to seek out information. You might be curious about something. You might want to dive into a new subject that catches your eye. It's a good day to be open for curiosity and exploration, and try to keep it light. It doesn't have to be heavy just because it's intense, right? It doesn't mean bad. There's a lot you can do with that. And so that is leading us into the weekend, and we have Venus moving into the sign of Cancer on Sunday the 16th, and then Monday we have Mercury moving into the sign of Cancer as well. And those happen pretty close together. We've got Venus moving in late on Sunday evening, and then early Monday morning, Mercury joins Venus in Cancer. When planets change signs like that, that lead up, building up to that energy of changing signs can be kind of intense. So there is a lot of big energy this weekend. And I just say that so that we can be mindful of it, so that we can know that it might just feel like a lot this weekend. And then while that buildup of energy is happening, not only do we have the moon moving out of a trine with Pluto, but we have it moving into a trine with Jupiter in Gemini. So it's going to be really magnified. It might feel a little bit more than we want it to feel. And I think by Monday, a lot of us will be feeling a release of that energy as things kind of start to settle in to their new signs for the next time being. But I think it's all really getting us ready for that Venus and Mercury in Cancer. Because if we want to slay out in the world, if we want to be empowered, if we want to work for personal and collective liberation and do the things that we are here to do in this life, we also have to be very aware of what's going on within us. And Cancer energy is very internal energy. It's very emotional energy, as is often stereotyped. So with this energy, you might be contemplating the inner child, maybe old patterns, things that happened a long time ago that you may kind of observe coming up in your life. Because sometimes, like, I don't know about you, when I'm doing stuff and I'm not really thinking about it, I'll notice my reactions to things. And sometimes I'm like, why did I react that way? Where is this coming from? Like, why do I feel so intensely about something that logically I know is not that big of a deal? And sometimes when I look a little bit deeper, I'll find, oh, this is actually something that happened to me when I was small. And that has just kind of been in the back of my mind. It's just been kind of a default way I've been looking at the world. And it's not actually reflective of where I am now. And so sometimes, like, shining that light on those emotional patterns can be really helpful in freeing us up to move forward. So with Mercury in Cancer, we just might be more aware of those things at this time. And awareness is really the first step to making more conscious, more empowered decisions. And sometimes when we see old patterns, it's like, okay, I didn't know this was a thing. Now it's a thing. So I can look at myself, my inner child, which is me, and be like, okay, I see that you're hurting. What can I do to help? What can I do to show you that you're safe? Because Cancer energy is very nurturing energy. And part of our responsibility as adults is to nurture ourselves in some way. Even if we need assistance of some kind, we can still care for ourselves on an emotional level. And that doesn't mean we don't ask for help when we need. Cancer energy is also very interdependent. It's energy that understands that when we are supported and we have the right people around us and the right resources we can really empower ourselves to do amazing things. But again, we cannot go out in the world and slay if we're a fucking mess on the inside. And lately, I don't know about you, I have been feeling very overwhelmed and very heartbroken. And, there's a lot in the world to be heartbroken about. It might be because something has always been a certain way. Or, it was a certain way when we were younger. So we might assume that it can't possibly be so different going forward. We need to let ourselves feel the feelings that we have about our reality, about our collective reality. And we need to bring awareness to those feelings. Like, okay, I feel that way. What can I actually do about it? That's really the Mercury energy meeting up with that Cancer energy. Because it's amazing what we can do when we are mindful of how we're feeling and we use it constructively to help move us forward. We are processing a lot of information and a lot of feelings at any given time. And for me, I have found myself clenching my body a lot lately. And it was a good reminder to me that we have to practice relaxing. It's so easy for that to kind of slip away for some of us, to not be very conscious of the things that we're just tolerating and swimming in because we've just been so uncomfortable for so long that it's oh my God, I can't even tell that I'm this uncomfortable. So becoming aware of those things, practicing different ways of doing things that are more nurturing to us. I think part of the world that we want to build is one where we're allowed to feel. We're allowed to hurt when we witness injustice. When our tax dollars and our weapons fund it, and not bury it away and carry on like nothing's wrong. A lot of shit is wrong. And sometimes we need to let ourselves feel it because it's real. But we can pick up and move forward. And with Venus in Cancer, we can use those hurts, those things that don't feel so good, to discover where we need more tending, more preparation, more practice, more support. And maybe for some of us, where we have more support to give to other people, where we can gather the people closest to us and tend to them if we have a little extra to spare. We can feel our way into a better way of thinking and existing. And it's not that in a better culture or a more liberated world, we won't get our feelings hurt, that there won't be pain and loss and discomfort at times. But we can make space for it. We can provide resources and support for it instead of just sweeping it away as the culture conditions us to do. There is so much under the surface that we are just expected to just go along with and not make too much of a fuss about. I think that's one of the reasons that people stereotype Cancer energy, because they're like, I don't want to have to deal with the reality that this is causing you to feel some type of way. Because you're killing the vibe. And look, I'm not saying that we need to spill our feelings all over everyone and, make our bad day someone else's problem. But the expectation that people don't hurt when the world is so clearly hurting for so many of us, it's dehumanizing. It makes us smaller. It limits us. Emotions are strength. Crying is a release. There is nothing wrong with feeling. I have one bumper sticker on my car, and it's by an artist who goes by the name Lord Cowboy, Anna Fusco, and the bumper sticker says, "We have been having feelings for years. They are perfectly safe." Yeah, I'm sure some people think it's kind of a weird bumper sticker, but I live in LA and people try to kill you for changing lanes here, so, we could stand to be a little bit more comfortable with having a big feeling. But the reason that I love this bumper sticker so much is that because as a Cancer rising, and a Scorpio, and all the other stuff I got going on in my chart, I am somebody that feels things very deeply. And for most of my life, I was discouraged from expressing those things openly because it made other people uncomfortable for me to feel too deeply. I was considered too sensitive, too dramatic. And for a lot of people that are raised as girls and women We are told not to be too emotional. That is something that is actively discouraged in us. And of course, with men, it's a similar thing. It's like you can't show how you feel because it compromises your masculinity or whatever. And that has done so much damage to our culture. It's disconnected us in this like massive way. So instead of being like, oh no, feelings, why don't we be like, oh, feelings? Because a lot of the things that I'm talking to you about right now are things that I learned through feeling. Feelings can be some of our greatest teachers if we are open to that, if we don't make an enemy of them. We've been feeling things for years. It is perfectly safe to feel. So don't be a little bitch about it, all right? I'm just kidding. I'm kidding. I love you. I would never call you a little bitch to your face. I'm kidding. It's Gemini season. I'm gay. I'm allowed to be a little chaotic at the end of my podcast, all right? It's been a long fucking week. And speaking of big feelings, I have exciting news about a new place that you may want to hang out in. I've joined forces with Petty Astrology regulars Mackenzie Wonzine and Jen Russell, and we created a Discord community for all of our Patreon members. So if you're a sponsor of this podcast, that means you. It's called Astro Den, and it's a place for all of our patrons to get together to talk astrology, spirituality, and build community, to make connections with other people that like what we're doing and what we're saying. Because we have people in there all over the United States and even in other countries. And we've all had different life experiences and different interests. So we all come from a lot of different backgrounds, but we have a few things in common. And there's a lot we can do with that. And actually, our first Discord community event for the Astro Den is going to be on Saturday, June 22nd. We're going to celebrate the solstice together. You can make vision boards, or if you want to do some kind of other intention setting, we are totally here for it. It's really just a good reason for us to celebrate this change in seasons and get to know each other better. It's really important as we go forward to continue making connections and making new connections too. So this is what that space is for. So if you're a patron of mine or Mackenzie's or Jen's, that gives you access to the Astro Den and a lot more great astrological content. I know it's almost summer and it's Pride Month and people are out living their lives and enjoying things, and that's great too. But there's already a really awesome community in there, and we'll be there when you get back too. That's all for this episode. Tune in next week. We're going to be talking about the summer solstice and the Capricorn full moon that we have the very next day. If you like the podcast and you haven't left us a review yet, I would really appreciate it if you do. Helps other people see us and know that we don't suck. This episode was produced by Carrie Wilson and Lori Rivers and brought to you by my sponsors over on Patreon. If you'd like to support the podcast, you can join us over at the link in the show notes.